With just less than 6 days to go before Election Day in America and early voting already well underway, a Michigan judge has struck down that state's ban on the open carry of guns near polling places and places where ballots are counted. The ban was put in place just a week after the FBI foiled a plot by an armed militia group to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Michigan's Secretary of State argues that it's a way to prevent possible attempts at voter intimidation, since there are significant and real concerns that armed militias will heed calls by President Donald Trump to, quote, go into the polls and watch and stand back and stand by to create chaos. Let's bring into this conversation MSNBC correspondent Cal Perry. He's live in Lansing, Michigan for us. Eddie's still here as well. So, Cal, I want to, first of all, are we supposed to call them armed militias or domestic terrorists?
The group that was here in Michigan that planned to kidnap, try, and then execute the governor is a domestic terror group, no question about it. Militias, I think, is partly the way of these armed groups to try to be more relevant in society. They have no relation to the militias that used to exist that had something to do with the U.S. government. So I think we call them armed groups, and we make the point clear that they call themselves militias.
Because I think this is one of those matters where we maybe normalize them by making them. I mean, I've watched your live shots from Tulsa to Kentucky, places where they're not breaking the law by standing on the streets with long guns, but there are a whole lot of other consequences, and one of them is to terrorize people in the streets. Is this an active debate among the groups themselves or the people that are having to contend with them?
It is. And last week I'm standing in Louisville, and I'm really happy that Eddie is here. I'm standing in Louisville, and the Black Panthers come marching into the square, and it's clear that they are there to protect this march on behalf of Breonna Taylor and her family. So we go over, and I start talking to these members of this Black Panther group who are heavily armed and dressed all in black. And I say, can I interview the leadership? And it's this young woman who's the leader of this Black Panther group. And they talk about it and they say, no, we're going to decline the interview. We're here to protect people. And of course, the Black Panthers are there because of what we've seen with the Black Lives Matter movement, but they're also there because of these militias. And there is a very real threat, I think, that is felt on these streets, especially in places like Louisville, where you have this social movement that's being hijacked, that you have these groups on the outside of. And that's where you have a very dangerous situation, as we're all rewatching the movie Recount, right, about the year 2000. I was thinking about this a lot, about how in 2000 we were like, all of America's institutions are going to be tested. This is a whole different thing now. All of America's institutions are going to be tested. Plus, we have people in the streets who, depending on what the president say, are going to arm themselves, go to polling places, or hang out in state capitals. It is a completely different ballgame, Nicole.
Cal, I'm so glad you're sort of on this beat. I'm not sure if you're as glad as we are, but can you just help me understand? I mean, I've seen in interviews with Alex Wagner for The Circus and interviews with you that aired on this show yesterday that a civil war is on the table for these armed militia groups or domestic terrorists or whatever we are calling them. What sort of preparations are underway?
Look, I think the FBI is into this deeply and doing this story and trying to find people we were going to interview. A lot of them were disappearing because the FBI was taking down their websites or actually visiting them in person. The thing that I think we do need to talk about it, and you mentioned Alex Wagner, right, is a lot of times these groups are libertarian, and Eddie Glaude was just talking about this, right? The president comes out and says, what is threatening you is your liberties. When these cities shut down and they make you wear a mask, this is about your liberties. And that is what is adding to the support that these armed groups have. And when you add the coronavirus into the equation, it's a super way of recruiting new members, because people are out of work and they believe in these liberties that the president talks to them about, and all of it gets jumbled up. And here we are 6 days before an election. I don't know if I answered your question. I sincerely hope I did.
Tell me more just what your impressions are and you mentioned the FBI. Christopher Wray, the current FBI director, has testified that the greatest terror threat is now white supremacist-oriented or ideologically inclined domestic terror groups. Where's the intersection between the armed militias and white supremacy-aligned domestic terror?
You saw this in the package yesterday, and I don't think anyone knows where that line is or what triggers it, and that is what is so scary, especially for the FBI. When did we move from liberties, and it is my right to hold a rifle in the Capitol here in Michigan, which I think should be up to some debate, depending on how this election goes, because I think it does make it harder for law enforcement. But when does that move to, this is my right as a libertarian, to a plot to kidnap and put on trial the governor of Michigan? I think a lot of people do make the argument that a lot of that is the rhetoric that is going on around the country. I wonder, and again, you know, not to harp on the Black Panthers, but to see them in such a visible way and to know the history of how the Black Panther movement and the FBI dealt with each other in the 60s, you wonder how the FBI is going through these mostly white militias. And there are black militias. We should be clear about that. There's a black militia out of Atlanta, the NFAC, not bleeping around anymore militia. That is their name. They marched into downtown Louisville. But for every action, there is an equal reaction, right? And so you see this ramping up, and it's just ramping up. These groups are disagreeing with each other. These websites are being shut down. They're having these arguments. They're on the streets. They don't know if they should be. They're dealing with the police. Katie Tur today made a great point. Some of the sheriffs are in line with different gun policies than some of the federal officials. And so all of this in the time of a pandemic, 6 days before the election, should have people worried. Nobody is saying that anything's going to happen, but the president right now, what he says matters. These people are listening to it, and the rhetoric that he chooses is having a great impact on these groups, Nicole.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.